Widespread health disparities put multiple communities at a disadvantage every day, except when dealing with health, you are essentially dealing with life or death, which is why it is extremely important to understand potential biases that might impact the quality of healthcare a person receives. Understanding how and when these biases develop can be important to interventions that can help minimize these biases. In this study, researchers Dorr, Hoffman, Lillard, and Showalter investigate how early children start to show similar racial biases that might carry on into adulthood. The researchers noted past studies that have shown continuous racial disparities in healthcare, especially in treating pain. It has been found that Black patients are continually undertreated for their pain compared to white patients, which relates to the assumption that many physicians hold that Black people feel less pain than white people. The researchers of this present study were interested in studying how early on in development these racial biases develop. Previous research shows that children start to show own race social preference and pro-white biases around the age of 5. As children get older, around the age of 7, they start to show more sophisticated race-related attitudes, such as being able to apply positive and negative racial stereotypes to Black people. The present study explores the development of race-related attitudes and biases for children. This is important as it would allow researchers to determine when interventions to address bias should occur in order to prevent continued biases into adulthood. For this study, 159 children participated from 3 different age groups: 5-year-olds, 7-year-olds, and 10-year-olds. The children were primarily white and middle to upper middle class. They were trained using the Wong-Baker Faces Pain Rating Scale, and were presented with 12 different scenarios in which they had to rate the pain for an image of a target Black child and an image of a target white child. Both of these images that were shown to the children were of target children with neutral expressions. They were also asked to rate what they imagined their own pain would be in given scenarios. For example, one scenario was, you bang your toe on a chair. The children were then asked to rate what they would imagine the target Black child's pain in this scenario to be, and do the same for the target white child, as well as rating their own imagined pain. This task was scored by giving each pain rating given by the child a score of 0 to 3. Children were also tested on social preference tasks and an evaluative stereotype measure. These 2 measures were included to confirm the researchers' expectations that racial attitudes would not explain bias in childhood. The social preference task consisted of showing the participants images of other children and asking them who they would want to be friends with. For each trial where the participant chose a white child, they were scored a 1, and each trial they chose a Black child, they were scored a 0. For the evaluative stereotypes task, participants were shown drawings of different children and were asked to say what they think other people would rate the child on a variety of positive traits. An example question that was asked was, would most people say this girl is very smart, sort of smart, or not smart at all? The pain of the target child was measured, as well as the rating of personal pain. The social preference and evaluative stereotype measures were measured in secondary analyses. This graph depicts the different average pain ratings for each age group of children. As you can see, the largest difference between the ratings for white and Black target children appears around the age of 10. 10-year-old children did seem to think that the target Black child in the picture would experience less pain than the target white child in the picture for each different scenario. There was a significant interaction between the race of the target and the age group of the children, showing that the effect of race on the 5-year-old children differed from the effect of race on the 10-year-old children. It is also apparent that the children rated their personal pain as the lowest of all. The researchers suggested the cause of this could be that children want to appear tough or brave, so they choose to rate themselves lower in pain than the target children they are shown. The social preferences and evaluative stereotype measures were looked at as potential moderators. The evaluative stereotype measure had limited variability, suggesting that there were no significant age trends in children's scores. However, there are limitations to this measure that will be further discussed in the limitation portion. The researchers ultimately found that the effect of the target race on pain ratings was not in fact moderated by social preference scores, evaluative stereotyping, parental education, or interaction with people of other races. Consistent with predictions, the data shows that 5-year-olds showed no racial bias, 7-year-olds showed a trend-level effect of target race, and the 10-year-old children clearly showed a racial bias. It seems that racial bias starts to emerge around the age of 7, but is more fully developed by the age of 10. The bias shown by 10-year-old children is consistent with previous adult data that shows adults also believe Black people feel less pain than white people. The data also showed that this bias was not moderated by social preference, which is consistent with findings in research with adults that show adults' racial bias in perceiving others' pain is not related to race-related attitudes. An alternate possibility to these findings is that this bias could be related to implicit racial attitudes. However, it is expected that implicit biases emerge early and remain stable, which is not consistent with this data. Some limitations of the present study include the fact that the methodology was adapted for children, meaning it is hard to compare effect sizes to other studies that are done with adults. There is also limited generalizability since this study was conducted with primarily white children. Additionally, for the portion that looked at evaluative stereotypes, only positive stereotypes were asked about. This limited the variance in the responses, causing this measure to be ineffective, thus limiting the data from ruling out stereotyping as being related to the emergence of racial bias. Children might be more aware of negative stereotypes about individuals of other races, which might make them more likely to apply these stereotypes. There is also an issue that younger children, such as the 5-year-old group, might not be able to fully understand certain questions they are being asked, or they might struggle with the concept of predicting another person's pain. It might be harder for children of this age to understand the concept of another person's pain, as it is essentially impossible to completely understand another person's pain in general, since pain is so subjective. The researchers mention ideas for future studies, such as looking into other racial and demographic differences and biases. For example, they suggest to look at how the age that Black children show biases might differ from the white children. They also suggest future research to see if similar racial biases in pain perception are apparent in other countries. Future research, besides what is already suggested in the present study, could also look into whether parents exhibit similar racial biases in pain as their children. This could help determine if certain attitudes might be taught or passed down within a family. Since previous research already shows that adults similarly rate the pain of Black patients as lower, it might be interesting to measure this bias within families while also including other measures of racial bias, such as stereotypes or false beliefs. By investigating whether patients might hold false beliefs about Black people and whether this influences biases against them, especially in pain management, we can be better informed about how these beliefs carry on to children's understandings and beliefs. This study could help determine if certain false beliefs are a product of how a child is raised compared to what they might hear or learn outside of the home. This present study presents beneficial information about when biases form, which can inform specific early interventions that change these biases for the future. These early interventions can help prevent racial biases in pain perception, which would be especially critical for future generations of doctors and healthcare workers.